Hey, how's it going? It's John Suntress, and welcome to Word Balloon. You found us. That's excellent. If this is your first time, please consider subscribing to us via iTunes or Stitcher or certainly Last FM and all the various places you can find podcasts. Word Balloon is invariably there. Subscribe. Please let me know what you think of the show. Write ratings over at Apple's podcast platform and give me a review. You can say nice things, you can say lousy things. You suck, John, and let me tell you why. Happy to hear your feedback either way. But do me a favor and like me where you can and leave comments. And also, as always, email me, john@wordballoon.com. I'm interested in your feedback. I'm interested in what you're thinking about the content that I put here. Also, I have a YouTube channel under Word Balloon. Would you please consider subscribing there? I've got about 400 plus subscribers currently. I'd like to get to at least 1,000 and start generating more video content. So go to YouTube and click on the Word Balloon channel and please subscribe.
Terrificon, Connecticut's biggest Comic-Con, returns to Mohegan Sun, August 9th to the 11th. Meet Billy D. Williams, Val Kilmer, Doctor Who's John Barrowman, and the voices from Animaniacs and Thundercats. New England's largest guest list of comic book artists from DC and Marvel Comics is at Terrificon on August 9th to the 11th at Mohegan Sun. Tickets on sale now at Terrificon.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here, another great episode for you today. A great conversation I just had last night with Dean Haspiel and Josh Neufeld. Now, Dean's been on many times over the years. I'm a huge fan of his work, whether it's his collaborations with Jonathan Ames, like The Alcoholic, or The Quitter with Harvey Pekar, and some work with American Splendor back in the day as well. But he and Josh, now Josh is a longtime collaborator with Harvey as well on American Splendor, and the two of them are doing a great new podcast. It's called Scene by Scene, and they are breaking down American Splendor kind of in the vein of the Star Wars Minute, but instead of doing each minute and just talking about that, they take full scenes and they analyze them. They give us the background of the context of these scenes as far as where comic books were from Harvey's childhood throughout his life, and really good stories. But also, we talk about what they're currently doing as well. Now, Dean's doing the Red Hook for Lion Webtoon Comics, a great phone app that's free, and you get free comics, and there's a lot of great creators there. And Dean's really one of their stars with the Red Hook, his excellent Brooklyn superhero story that continues, and he's wrapping up Volume 3. Volume 2 is coming out in full book form from Image in the fall, and he mentions that. Josh has some other great projects coming up we go back to and talk about some of his reportage comics in the vein of Joe Sacco, and we talk about his work covering Hurricane Katrina, both on the ground as an actual person that was a volunteer helping at the scene, but also those notes then became his wonderful comic about Hurricane Katrina. And we also talk about his collaboration with one of my favorite National Public Radio hosts, Brooke Gladstone, and a very interesting work on the way that journalism is presented to the public and how it interacts, and a more factual look at journalism and the people. And, especially in this era of fake news, it's nice to get some reality. And I think Josh and Brooke's comic book really provided that. It's still available today. We talk about some other future projects that they've got coming up, and also just, where things are in the underground comic movement. I guess they fall under that category, a lot of their work, although Dean does a lot of mainstream work as well. And we talk about his work on Vertigo, and also some old Marvel work that it was always his dream to do the Fantastic Four, and he was able to do it in a great Thing miniseries, among other projects that he's done for Marvel and the like over the years, and DC for that matter. But it's always great to get the point of view of where the market is from creators, and it's great to hear from this area of the comic book world and these creators. Josh Neufeld, Dean Haspiel on today's Word Balloon. Brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners via Patreon. Thank you very much for subscribing, League. It greatly helps me out. If you'd like to subscribe, Word Balloon is free. It will always be free, but if you want to help me out on the cause, is Word Balloon worth the price of a comic book to you? If you think so, go to patreon.com/wordballoon or go to the front page of wordballoon.com, click on the Patreon ad. Thank you, League of Word Balloon listeners. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. Check out their wonderful books. It's a great year for Aftershock, and they've been, churning out amazing books to put alongside things like Marguerite Bennett's Animosity, and Garth Ennis's Jimmy's Bastards, and Dark Ark from Cullen Bunn, and Baby Teeth from Donny Cates. There's things like Dark Red from Tim Seeley, and also Stronghold from Phil Hester and Ryan Kelly, and even more new books like Joe Pruitt's horror anthology Shock. Cullen Bunn's got Knight's Temporal coming up very soon. Chris Sabella just got Trustfall underway, and Matthew Klickstein's You Are Obsolete are coming very soon. They will take readers far beyond their comfort zones in these books. In the weeks ahead, we'll have more talks with other Aftershock creators about their books. In the last couple of weeks, we talked to Tim Seeley and Chris Sabella. But until then, go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. All right, without further ado, let's get into our conversation now with Dean Haspiel and Josh Neufeld on Word Balloon. Josh Neufeld and Dean Haspiel, welcome to Word Balloon. Dean, welcome back. And Josh, first time. It's a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Good to be back on the show.
Absolutely, man. No, and I'm. This is a great new podcast that you guys have, Scene by Scene, correct?
That's right. It.
And it's a minute-by-minute examination of American Splendor, the movie. Paul Giamatti playing
not
Pekar?
Quite minute by minute. We're not going that granular. We're literally doing it scene by scene. So anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes or so.
No, that's cool, man. And again, you guys have the insight, having worked with Harvey on various books over the years and stuff. So that's cool. And no, I've enjoyed it, man. A lot of deep dive. That you guys spend like 40 minutes on 3 minutes of movie footage because there is a lot of backstory there. So that's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really fun.
You guys getting a good response? Yeah, go on.
It was Josh's initial idea. And Josh, if you want to talk about it more, I mean, you were inspired by Star Wars Minute, right?
Yeah. So I became a big fan maybe 3 or 4 years ago of these minute by minute, movie by minute podcasts, including Star Wars Minute, hosted by Alex Robinson and Pete the Retailer, who used to work at Forbidden Planet out here in New York.
Cool.
And I just love those shows. And I started thinking, could I do a podcast? You know, I'm right around the right age, like midlife crisis, when all the other guys start podcasts. So it's like I think I'm supposed to start a podcast. And yeah, being a former illustrator of Harvey Pekar's and having known Dean for going on 35 years,
okay,
and him also being a former Pekar illustrator and the guy who kind of greased the wheels that made the movie happen, knowing the producers and knowing Harvey as he did, I thought this could be the perfect entree into the podcasting world, would be a deep dive into the American Splendor movie with Dean as my partner in crime. So that's sort of where it all started.
And I think I had my first midlife crisis in 2011 when me and Seth Kushner and Chris Miskevich and Jeffrey Burant launched Trip City, and we did a podcast there for a little while. But we didn't really know what we were doing. So luckily I had a second midlife crisis, thanks to Josh. And now we're doing this podcast. But it's funny because Josh and I also kind of have different ideas of what a podcast is, which I think is why this podcast has been an interesting project for us. Yeah, Josh, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I don't want to air too much dirty laundry of the behind the scenes fight. I mean, we always sound like we love each other on mic, but there's a lot of stuff going behind in the green room.
A lot of tension.
Which is why we don't have a YouTube channel, because it's too much blood.
Yeah, we rated
That's right.
Mature for violence.
Well, you guys, that's all right. You guys could be on camera and stuff. You see, this is why I'm audio.
Oh, come on.
And clearly,
No.
Clearly, my midlife crisis has been going on now for 14 years.
Oh, man.
So that's what happens.
Awesome,
they just don't stop, huh? They just keep going.
Honestly, and I'll be interested to hear why you guys chose podcasting. For me, it was a platform to do the radio show I've always wanted to do, but knew I would never be able to get a local radio station to be interested in doing this. I mean, certainly when I started, and I felt it was a good time just because it was 2005, so Batman Begins, Sin City, like all of a sudden, good movies were being made of comic book stuff, and suddenly people were taking it seriously, and I'm like, oh, this is just the beginning. And then, Whedon is writing X-Men, and all these other, like, back and forth kind of moves between the film and television world and comics and stuff. And I know there's always been a little bit of that. I know that a lot of the great DC writers were writing the Superboy syndicated show in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So,
right.
But, it just seemed like, again, it just seemed even more mainstream. And it was like, oh, maybe this is the right time. So what about it with you guys? Other than midlife crisis?
Just respond to what you said. Like, I think now you could absolutely bring your show to some network. You've been doing this for so long. You have a great voice. You have great intuition. You like pop culture. You navigate between the mainstream and the independent. I would think now, because of the popularity, well, let's just say it's the popularity of the movies and cosplay and Comic-Cons and the events. I don't know if comics are doing as well as they should be.
Right.
I do. And we've discussed that in the past, although webcomics and, everyone, and comics being on your phone and everything. So it does exist and people are aware of them. But I feel like you're right. In 2005, it might have been a stretch. But now that you've been around at it so long, kind of like, with Heidi McDonald, like, what's it been 15 years for her now with The Beat?
Right.
Right. Like, I used to joke that she was the Rona Barrett of comics,
Sure.
Doing, and it's become as popular as Bleeding Cool.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Even though there are a billion podcasts and a billion comic book websites, there's only about 3 that I listen to and go read, still. But that could be because I'm an old guy now and I'm just sticking with the familiar. But for me, podcasts, I don't listen to as many as I probably could or should. But Mark Maron's WTF,
sure,
is an interview conversation show that's that I've kind of gotten used to. I've been listening to Bill Burr a little bit.
I like Bill Burr,
and a few others. And for me, I guess the reason why I listen to a podcast is for the conversation and the meandering a little bit, but depending on the person's being that are the people who are talking,
Absolutely.
Because meandering could go down a drain.
Man.
You can literally be wasting everybody's time, and one of the cool things about working on this podcast with Josh has been the amount of homework that Josh has done, and then the amount of preparation that Josh has done. It's been incredible to take part in that. And then because of how much work he does, I get to kind of just hop in like a half hour before we record. I watch a scene, I jot down some notes, and I always felt that I work better with my knee-jerk reactions.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Extemporaneously, sure.
I think so. And I think, Josh, do you agree with that? That, like, I'm okay in that, way, doing it that way?
Enough talking about you guys. Let's talk about me. No, Dean is awesome. Like, that's why I wanted him on the show, besides all the other things, is that he's always lit, there's always going to be something interesting that comes out of his mouth. And he makes great connections and always finds things in scenes, no matter how much preparation I might have done that I don't see. And that spark of spontaneity is, what really, I think, drives the show and keeps it entertaining.
I completely agree. Yeah. I mean, honestly, hearing it and stuff, I think, you really are the analytical one, and Dean gets to kind of dance. And Dean, honestly, every compliment that you just gave me, I can easily do in kind, in the same way that Josh was saying, is that, we're all, these, Josh, how much younger are you? Because I'm slightly older than Dean. I'm 54. I'll throw my cards on the table. It's all right.
Oh, I'm like so many months younger than that. Like at least
53.
I'm going to be 52.
Okay.
At some point soon.
Well, honestly, man, and I know sometimes it's really easy to knock the white middle-aged guys that are podcasting, and especially that are nerds and stuff. But I truly do think that, especially ones that still are finding new things to get excited about. And forgive me for collectively patting us all on the back, but we do have that perspective of coming from the 3-channel childhood, and we had no choice but to see Buster Crabbe as Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers because they reran it all the time. And Clayton Moore's the Lone Ranger. And I know and George Reeves and Adam West and all that stuff kind of helped us really fall in love with these things and then maintain them. And then, obviously, Dino, in your career and everything, drawing this stuff. And obviously, Josh, I mean, again, I've listened enough that you're of this world as well. So, like I said, yeah, because we know all the good old stuff, because again, it was ran all the time. Anyone of our age that was into this stuff would feel the same way. But then, I just think then the further chapter, Calvin Reed, you mentioned the Beat, Calvin Reed over at Publishers Weekly. I love that guy. Because he's like, he's like 10 plus years older than us, and he still gets excited about new stuff. And that's fantastic, because that's always, when I've talked to like the Len Weins and the Marv Wolfmans and stuff, it's like, how much do you guys watch of the new stuff? And I don't blame them. It's okay, man. I mean, God, it's like pop music. I thought I'd be, new pop music forever. Nah, not so much. So anyway.
Well, it's funny, John. First of all, what you're talking about is passion. It's how infectious passion can be, and how to make that come across in a podcast, in an essay, in the artwork, in the writing. But what's interesting is something I hadn't thought about is when we were kids, because I'm 52, so we're all about the same age. Yeah. When we were kids, a lot of our television, and we didn't know this at the time, but a lot of our television, our media, were reruns.
Right.
They were old stuff. I Love Lucy, Star Trek, Twilight Zone, all that stuff. Absolutely. And yes, we did have new stuff as well, but it never occurred to me when I was a kid that I was looking at older material, that I was falling in love with the older material,
Yes.
Now they create material, TV shows like that drops, on a Friday, all the episodes of the season, and then you have all these people like, are they even watching the show as they keep it on in the background so they can write the little blog post about it on Monday? I don't even know. I don't even know how you can enjoy anything now. It's disturbing to me. Whereas, like, we could watch a show and then we could all talk about it in the schoolyard or, call your friend up or, I remember the last time I watched what they call appointment TV.
Sure.
Appointment television.
Yeah.
Was, I believe it was either Lost or Breaking Bad. Where like, an episode would come on, then you waited 7 days for the next episode.
Yep.
And what I loved about that is it taught me to be a better writer, because what I could do is think about the different ways of what might happen next. And then you have that dialogue with your friends and family and peers. And it just kind of like charged, it activated the creative energies in your mind. And then you come up with other stories, and turn that into other things. And I think what's cool about having conversation about a subject as a vessel, in this case, American Splendor, the movie, is that we get to talk about the movie, sure. But what was important to me, more important to me, was to talk about my relationship with Josh, growing up in New York City, learning to make comics together and what that all meant and the trials and tribulations of that. And I feel like, in a way, you might come in, learning about American Splendor, the movie, but you walk away learning more about me and Josh.
That's awesome.
And also maybe just about the history of comics starting in the 70s and 80s, which is when we started being in touch with them, and sort of how they've all changed, over the years and decades. But also I think, a big part of the show is about comparing the original comics that inspired scenes in the movie to the way that they were translated into film form. And so a lot of our discussion is about craft and about how are movies different than comics? What are the obligations of stories, in a more passive form like in film and television, or in a more active reader form like comics, where the reader is required to do so much more in terms of inference and filling in and kind of creating a three-dimensional experience. And I think those kind of conversations are really exciting, because Dean and I have been professional cartoonists together like more than 50 years. Yep. And Dean also has this background in film. He's a film major in college, and he's worked in film and TV productions. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge movie fan, and have always been a fan of like directors' commentaries and just thinking about storytelling in all of its different forms. So I think we actually have some expertise in that area where we can talk about those things in a way that I think brings out the nuances of both. You sort of see why the choices were made in the film to cut out certain things, to make shortcuts, to smooth over certain stories so that disparate stories that Harvey wrote that would then work together to make the narrative of the film play better. But then maybe, hopefully, it gets you to go back and read the original comics, and then maybe hopefully go back and read some of Dean and my comics as well.
Absolutely, man. And also to learn from a process standpoint, because that's something that I think a lot of the better comic book podcasts are able to provide. And I try to give that forum to creators when they come on. I don't speak the language as well as maybe, obviously not as a creator themselves, a cartoonist themselves. So, people will ask, I'm a writer, and I've from a journalism standpoint, I covered boxing for years, wrote sports and things like that. Yeah. So I kind of, gravitate more in terms of being able to, I think, ask better writing questions than art questions. And again, visual storytelling is writing. And I think comparing film to cartooning is important, because I think a lot of aspiring cartoonists are watching movies and thinking, about what they will put in their comics based on what inspires them from film.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
No, that's
and Josh, we growing up, we both tried our hand at genre and superheroes.
Yeah.
And then at some point, Josh gravitated toward journalism, and
I wanted to ask about that. Yes. Go on.
Yeah. So Josh, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit. What pulled you in that direction?
Why, thank you.
Why are you such a dick?
He's doing my job for me. This is good, Josh. And I'm all for it. No, this is great. This is when I get to kick back, and I'll let Dean lead. All right.
Sorry, guys.
No, we're busting your shit. You know that. Come on.
I know.
No, it's funny. It's just funny. Dean and I, just to set the background for your listeners, we actually met in high school when we were, I think, freshmen, like second semester freshman year.
Fantastic.
And it was one of those random things where we started joking together in the lunchroom, had no idea that both of us were into comics, started talking some more, and then it was revealed, that we were both aspiring cartoonists. And at that point, we had very similar tastes and goals. Like, I think, Dean, you wanted to grow up to be the artist for the Fantastic Four, right? And I wanted to draw Teen Titans. So, I was on the DC side and he was on the Marvel side, which should have said something. But we had a lot of adventures, comics related and non-comics related, all through high school, and really cemented our friendship during those years and in years after. And even though, I did, as I got older, probably into my, through college and then into my early 20s, started kind of aging out of genre comics a little bit. And plus that was like a weird time, because that was, the whole 90s speculation boom. And so
drove me away from comics, frankly. It really did for several years. I totally understand.
Same here. So that was kind of the nail in the coffin. And that was right around the time, though, that I kind of discovered alternative comics, what we call alternative comics, like American Splendor and like 8-Ball and Hate and a whole variety of comics that started coming out in the early 90s. And ironically, Dean had had much wider tastes than I did, like going back to the, high school years. So he already knew about Chester Brown and about American Splendor and Harvey Pekar. Those were all, and Mouse, I guess. I guess I was introduced to Mouse and Love and Rockets probably when I was still in high school.
Okay,
But even then, I wasn't sure that they were comics. It was like I had this very fixed idea in my head of what comics were, which was colorful, action, adventure, superhero, science fiction kind of stuff. And it took a while for me to kind of come around to say, wait a second, like as Scott McCloud says, comics are just a vessel to tell the story, and the story can be anything. It was literally, you can tell any kind of story in comics form. So it was in those formative years of my 20s that I started kind of discovering the other potentials for comics. And I discovered Joe Sacco, who really popularized comics journalism. And so right around the time that I was starting to illustrate Harvey's stories in American Splendor and starting to write my own autobiographical stories, I started to also, come around to the idea of maybe I could tell real stories in comics form, and maybe even something like what Joe Sacco does. And that's sort of where my career kind of moved in that direction.
And one big story like that was, of course, your coverage of Katrina. And what was the title of your Katrina stuff again?
So that was A.D. New Orleans After the Deluge,
Yep.
which came about because I had actually volunteered with the Red Cross after Hurricane Katrina.
Wow.
And gone down, and I'd gotten trained as a disaster response worker, and I got deployed eventually down to the hurricane zone, and I worked down in that area about a month after the hurricane, working with survivors and doing food runs and all sorts of stuff. I wrote a lot about those experiences. I guess I was doing background research for AD, even though I didn't know it. And then about a year after that, I got invited by a website called Smith Magazine to do a comic book story, journalistic treatment of Hurricane Katrina. And that was sort of what set me down that path. And I did that for about a year and a half, research, finding people whose stories I wanted to tell, telling all these different story threads in different ways. And then that turned into a book, and that sort of set me down that path that I'm still on.
That's cool. Is the Smith website still around or no?
It is, yeah, and AD is still up there as a free webcomic.
Oh, wow.
As is a number of other projects that they did, including the Pekar project that our mutual friend Jeff Newell edited, and Dean's Next Door Neighbor project, and the original Shooting War comic they did. So, yeah, they have a lot of great content still up there.
What were you going to say? Yeah.
Well, I was saying before that, before Josh did AD, we had done, did we mention Keyhole?
Tell me about Keyhole, please.
Yeah.
So Josh and I, was it after? It was after college, and you were still living in Chicago.
Yeah, that was when I was in Chicago.
You said for like 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where you met like Chris Ware, Jessica Abel,
Terry LeBon.
Yeah. Dan Clowes was in Chicago too, or
he
no?
had just left after I moved there. Like I missed him by like a month. He had moved out to the West Coast.
And there was a place, was it called, not the Ear Inn, what was it called?
Earwax?
Oh, Earwax.
Yeah.
And it was like a cafe, kind of like...
Slash
like
bookstore, slash
Right.
like venue, it was a cool place.
Oh, wow.
And y'all would sit there and kind of make like mini comics together or something, right?
Well, they did that. Chris Ware, Terry LeBon, Dan Clowes, and a couple other guys did that. And then when I moved there... shortly afterwards, they still had some of their minis for sale at Earwax, and
Okay.
Chris, I befriended Chris because we had a mutual friend, Rob Walker, who I later collaborated with in Titans of Finance, and he, hooked me up with Chris, and Chris told me about the minis, and then I, immediately copied that idea, and I think when you and your girlfriend came out on a visit, we made some minis, and other people came and visited, we did minis together, and so... Yeah, that tradition continued.
Is that what inspired our Keyhole? Because we started Keyhole as a mini comic, and we went like, 5 issues or something?
I think we did 4 issues, and then you found a publisher to take it to the big time.
Right. So we got an independent publisher, and it was all new material, I believe, the first issue of the comic book series.
Yeah, I don't think we reprinted anything from the mini. We just went straight to new stuff.
And then we
were
had...
productive.
Yeah, and we decided because I think the publisher was called Millennium, and they were more known, I think, for like horror and splatter porn or something. I don't remember.
Some licensed titles too.
Some licensed titles, and then we realized we were getting lost in the mix. I think they served a certain audience, and we were doing a 2-man 8-ball in a way.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so. And Josh was focused more, I believe, on kind of semi-autobiographical and travel stories. And I was kind of dipping my toe in different genres, and as well as, memoir type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a real mixed bag. And then we convinced the publisher to kind of spark an imprint of different alternative comics. And I think we called that Modern Comics, which was the imprint of Millennium. And I think we went 4 issues with that, and then that's when Top Shelf kind of wooed us and decided to take over and publish issues 5 and 6.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Staros.
Yeah, Chris Staros, Brett Warnock, great guys. I mean, I was there at SPX when we were all sitting there, like, it might have been the 3rd or 4th year of SPX, and they were sitting there and they decided to ally and become the top shelf publishing, empire
Hilarious.
that they became.
Yeah.
So
hilarious.
It was really cool.
Oh my God.
And then I've known them ever since.
Sure.
And then they published. I had also done like 3 issues of my Billy Dogma comic at Modern Comics.
Okay.
And then they also picked up Billy Dogma, and they did a really cool redesign, and it was more indie friendly, and it made more sense, honestly, to go with Top Shelf.
Dean, do you remember who their designer was?
Craig Thompson.
Wow, great.
Right.
Before he was getting published himself.
Absolutely, man. No.
Before he was published, he designed the issues 5 and 6 of Keyhole and a Billy Dogma comic called Boy in My Pocket. And maybe even Daydream Lullabies, the first collection of material, which if I look at now, I just cringe. But, we grow up in public, right? So anyway.
We do. Yeah.
But I was really excited by like a lot of the stories that Josh was doing, like, because Josh would travel with his then girlfriend, now wife, Sarah Wilson, who's become a published writer, and would have all these cool stories. And then you did a collection, right, Josh, of that material?
Yeah, after we published almost all of them in Keyhole, and then I published one in my spin-off title, The Vagabonds, and then collected them all with the aid of the Xeric grant, one of the best.
Hey, that's great!
Grants.
Oh, congratulations! Yeah. That's one. Yeah, absolutely. And I know we've talked about the Xeric grant before, but you go ahead and describe what the Xeric grant is.
Yeah, so I can never remember which of them it was, whether it was Eastman or Laird, but one of the guys who
I believe it's Laird. I believe it is Laird.
Okay, so Peter Laird, right?
Yep.
Founded, 2 of the founders of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. One of them, Laird, started a foundation called the Xeric Foundation, which created these self-publishing grants for small artists, for small cartoonists.
Yes.
And they specifically, were there to fund people who probably wouldn't have gotten a publishing contract from a DC or a Marvel or even an Image or any of the other smaller
requests. Man. No, and it came at a great, when the internet was still new, and I don't think as many people figured out like webcomics and things like that. And it was, and actually I think it even predated, I think, that kind of webcomic work. Because it was like mid-90s that they started that?
Yeah, I think it was early to mid-90s, right around the time that SPX started, actually.
There you go. Yeah, man. And so, no, it was a great bridge to, I think, the ability to make. I think it's easier. You guys tell me if it's easier now. If you know.
Oh yeah, I think the web has definitely made it a lot easier for people to get their work out there.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
Well, but if I may,
contradict this, man. Go, Dean.
Because I'm essentially making a living the last 3 years, creating a webcomic that's actually, for your phone, designed for the phone.
Webtoons, indeed. Yes. And the Red Hook.
Webtoon, the Red Hook. But I would hazard that when we had a more concentrated field, i.e., DC, Marvel, Image wasn't even the number 3 publisher yet.
Yep.
It was like Dark Horse and I guess Drawn and Quarterly, Top Shelf, all these competitive. Fantagraphics was probably, one of the bigger publishers of indie comics. But you had to go to a comic shop or to the shows, and I feel like the internet has leveled the playing field in such a way that you almost can get immediately lost because of how much content is out there. Forget comics. You're competing with, like, whatever Trump tweeted today.
Sure. Sure.
Everybody's attention span.
Every distraction.
There's so much.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep.
So there's so much distraction happening that I think it's actually it's easier to create comics online and get it, quote, distributed and hopefully marketed in some way. But I think it's actually harder to get people to even click on something for free, to be honest.
Well, I hear you, man. And honestly, I did want to ask you about how things are going webtoons-wise because, I remember when I know they started in Korea and it's a Korea-based company, but
right.
But yeah, I know a lot of American creators have been enticed to create content for them, and how it's going, and 3 years in, man, and at least 3 arcs, correct, for Red Hook so far?
Right. So I started, 3 years ago with the season 1, which then becomes a volume 1 in print.
Yeah.
So that would be the Red Hook, and then I did a sequel called Warcry, which was just an extension of the story, and then that will hopefully be coming out in October. From Image Comics. The first one was also published by Image Comics. So that's volume 2. And then I'm currently 13 pages away from finishing season 3, which is only about halfway done online in terms of chapters. And yeah, it's for a free, webcomics app called Line Webtoon. And they've done a really good job of wooing and enticing American creators for their American version of their app to create original materials. In this case, I own the Red Hook, which is really cool. And I have pretty much an autonomous creative space to do what I want, as long as I adhere to certain, rules about sex and violence and language.
Okay.
And, obviously, because I think there's been a lot of tightening of the belt lately. I think even Twitter recently put up a new, terms of conduct or something.
Yes.
As they should, to be honest, I think, not to be too conservative. But, the shit show that is social networking sometimes can be awful.
Oh, God,
and toxic.
Yes.
And morbidly toxic. But having said that, a lot of us are just creating free content and free comics. But again, a lot of us are doing that. And it's the playing field has been leveled from veterans to rookies to, someone's mom just, drawing a stick figure comic, to bring it back to Harvey Pekar, But yeah, and I feel like it's easy to get lost, because at the end of the day, what it starts to become is all about numbers and metrics, and it's just ultimately a popularity contest now. And unless you're like hitting it big, it becomes a little difficult. And I still keep my energy and creativity up, but I'm a communication artist. That's what we do, and I want to be able to communicate my story and my ideas more than what it's gotten thus far.
Fair enough.
I love that Dean. He's always been ambitious, openly ambitious, nakedly ambitious,
yes.
which is really refreshing. And like, I think that's what artists need to own that, like he's always, from the moment I met him when he was 14, he had something to say, and he used his platforms to say it. And what I love about the work that you're doing, Dean, and always have done, or at least since, you were doing Tommy Rocket back in college, and then going on to Billy Dogma, and now on to what you're doing with the Red Hook, is you talk about what you see out there in the world, and you use superheroes, you use the genre to create your own allegories and your own, your own universe that reflects what you see out there in the real world, but told within the vernacular of superhero stories. And it's frustrating. I mean, it's like, there's a certain audience which is going to dig that and like buy into you 100%, but it's so personal and unique to your voice that I think, it can be frustrating for you. I know that it is, 'cause, you get that vehicle, to say those things. There's always editors out there who love what Dean has to say, and there's always a rabid fan base. But, whether it's big or smaller depends on a lot of other factors.
Well, I really appreciate that, Josh. Thanks a lot for saying that and recognizing that. And it's funny because, we are the yin to each other's yang.
Yes, totally.
And the stuff that you do and the way you approach comics, from a journalistic point of view, or where the truth or the facts are really important, how to navigate around those facts, because you base your comics on evidence. And I feel like I think I've said this before. I know I've said this to you, Josh. I don't know if I've said this to John, but the struggle I had with doing memoir comics was the culpability of it, how it had to be very culpable to a timeline, to certain truths. And I always felt that my Billy Dogma stuff, or Red Hook, or even Tommy Rocket, I felt like they were more true to my persona in my life because they were more emotionally true. And I prefer that over, the facts. I prefer feelings over facts in a lot of ways, and I
think I'm that way too. Like I try to make my true stories feel like fiction in a sense, like to have that energy of fictional narrative. But yeah, there is a certain like red line that I don't cross, because I do want the reader to feel that they can trust me as a storyteller. And actually, in this episode that we just dropped this week of Scene by Scene, episode 14, we talk about that. That's one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about, is sort of like our different approaches to the kinds of stories we tell and what we expect, what we imagine the reader's expectations are. And I remember that we talked about, their expectations about a autobiographical comic that the reader takes with them. And then there are the expectations that they have when they're reading a superhero comic. And I remember that our debate, I can't summarize it right now. I mean, people should go and listen. But I thought it was a very interesting conversation, because we do come down in slightly different places in that, even though we have such a shared history.
I've got your description. I got your description of the episode right here. Our most authentic episode to date, and the next thing. It's the 80s. Harvey's published 8 issues of American Splendor to critical acclaim, but little financial gain. He's still a flunky file clerk. Toby stops by to offer Harvey some gourmet jelly beans. Before you know it, the film gets meta as the real Harvey crosses paths with Paul Giamatti and the real Toby Radloff crosses paths with Judah Friedlander. What if there was a Harvey Pekar Award in comics? How nuns get their names? Critical success versus commercial success. The questions of Toby Radloff and existential loneliness. Yes, and man, Radloff is such an interesting guy, and now I'm blanking. Wayne in Cleveland. That's his buddy. Wayne Allen Harold is.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Right.
I love Wayne, and his community of people and everything. And yeah, Toby's listened to Word Balloon a couple times and said nice things about him. He did in the past. He's still with us, isn't he?
He is,
okay,
yeah, and we're going to have him on the podcast.
Oh, that's great.
Listen
for
wonderful. An upcoming episode.
No, he's great, man. He really is. He's such a genuine person, and I love that about him. No pretension whatsoever. And it's really his story as told in American Splendor, because I remember those cut-ins from MTV when he was doing spring break in Cleveland, and it was fun. He was hilarious. So yeah, and I used to be at I can't remember what their message board community was that Wayne used to run back in the early 2000s, but I was there, and I'd chime in on subjects as well. Good guys, man.
I forget, John, did you ever meet Harvey Pekar?
No, I'm kicking myself, because he came to the Tribune Printers Row Book Fair one summer, and it was when I think the Beats, I can't remember if the Beats came out posthumously or not, but I think that's what he was promoting, and I missed him. So no, I never got the chance, never met Joyce. Respect the hell out of both of them, and God, grew up, in college, was watching Letterman every time, and really high school. I mean, I started around 82 or whatever when he started having Harvey on, and Harvey was amazing, absolutely cool, yeah. Jesus, and
I would have loved to have heard the conversation you would have had with him.
It would have been a pleasure, because I know he,
you know why? Because of boxing, because he,
I had no idea. That's fantastic.
So originally, I did The Quitter with Harvey, which is basically his origin story, for lack of a better, description. But after American Splendor, the movie came out, I'd only done maybe 6 or 7 pages worth of American Splendor comics with him. Josh had done a lot more.
Okay.
And kind of as a thank you, he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to do something more substantial with you." And we started to come up with ideas that would be eventually a graphic novel that I would, then take somewhere. In this case, it landed at Vertigo with Jonathan Bankin as editor. But the first idea he came up with that didn't really fly was a history of Jewish boxers.
Oh God, that would have been great. For real.
And I might have a document somewhere, I don't know how many pages, where he started writing out this whole thing, and I started looking up Jewish boxers, and I drew something, but it didn't really fly. And then The Quitter is what finally eventually sold, which is more his origin story.
Wow.
Oh, I didn't realize that you actually went down the path a little bit on the Jewish Boxers book before.
Yeah.
I thought it was sort of dead on arrival. That's interesting.
I've read so many great histories of, people like Benny Leonard and, the trainers. All the great trainers were marvelous, Jewish men that, Whitey Bimstein and Ray Arcel. And these guys were just fixtures literally from the 30s into the 60s and worked with everybody. And good Lord, Ray Arcel into his 80s and 90s was training Roberto Duran and Larry Holmes. I mean, it just was this unbelievable boxing sage. And I loved him. And Bimstein was just this cut man genius that his daughter would tell stories of like kids would get scrapes and they'd come to Whitey because he had all the stuff that he would use in the ring for fighters, and he'd be able to, it's like, no problem, I got this, and it's just, I love that stuff. No, and yeah, Benny Leonard, known as the Ghetto Wizard of the 20s, one of the greatest like fast hands and fast feet, just a great kind of dancing, had his share of knockouts, but was a dazzling boxer and an incredible fighter. So yeah, I could. Oh yeah, Harvey and I would have something to talk about.
You would have a whole couple of podcasts, and it's funny because when he introduced that idea to me, I was like, "Where is this coming from?" I get the Jewish thing, but I didn't understand where the boxing, the pugilist, interest was until we worked on The Quitter, and I realized that he was a bully who beat up people, and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of where
Harvey was a bully that beat up people."
In The Quitter, I mean, obviously it's much more nuanced than that. Yeah. But part of the reason why it's called The Quitter is because if he wasn't great at something, he'd quit it.
Sure.
That was part of his mantra. But if there are definitely a few instances where he's the aggressor and he actually beats kids up.
Wow.
As a youngster. And I remember when I drew those scenes, I mean, I wasn't in full Jack Kirby mode at all because it's memoir. But I remember drawing, different angles, and going for a little bit of the gusto, and getting criticized by, the regular Pekar fans that thought that I was the wrong artist for this story.
Hilarious.
Because, oh my God, look at the way he's drawing someone being punched and there's blood and it's a Dutch angle or whatever the hell. And I was like, but that's how you draw a punch.
Sure.
That's how people fight in comics, like, come on, man,
Well, and also, you guys point this out early in the podcast. And I want to give you your credit, Dean. I had no idea that you're like the guy that said, hey, Harvey's life should be a movie.
Well, all right. So I was an assistant to Ted Hope, the movie producer, at the time. And I remember, cleaning up or reorganizing his apartment. And I came across a bunch of scripts. And one of them said American Splendor on it. I was like, wait, what's this? And it must have been an early draft of a different iteration of the American Splendor story.
That was the Rob Schneider one, probably.
That was the Rob Schneider one, probably.
Is that real? Is that real, Rob?
Yeah, he actually was like seriously considered for the role of Harvey. Like not for the film that eventually got made, but earlier in the 90s.
Wow.
It's just so interesting.
Absolutely. God, maybe that would have been a good, no offense to Schneider fans, but God, that might have actually given him a chance to do something other than, what we got.
Did he do a movie called not American Gigolo, but Deuce
Bigelow?
Deuce Bigelow, male Gigolo.
Yeah, exactly, man.
Yes.
No, I mean, and I'll be honest, I do like him in some of the Sandler movies where he's got 5 minutes and stuff, but he's got Dan Aykroyd disease. Don't give him a whole movie.
Yeah. Oh man,
that's it.
And I love Dan Aykroyd. Good Lord, comedy genius of the '70s and Ghostbusters and beyond. Just don't, Dr. Detroit speaks very loudly.
Yeah.
But conversely, who knew that Harvey Pekar could be a lead in his own movie?
Absolutely.
Basically,
oh my God, the way they made it was incredible.
Is incredible, and that's one of the things in revisiting this movie and discussing it with Josh on the podcast. Like, not only is Harvey great and Joyce, but the people who portrayed the real people are incredible. Paul Giamatti, man, he just went next level.
Yeah.
From what, Pig Vomit to Harvey Pekar.
That's true.
Unbelievable what he was able to access and
Hope Davis, bring. Hope Davis was great as Joyce.
Amazing. Judah Friedlander, everybody in it.
Toby, absolutely, man. Yeah, no, they're all great.
But even more incredible is how the filmmakers were able to. So, all right. So I was telling you about Ted Hope.
Yeah.
I look up this script. I say, wait a second. And I've been drawing a couple of stories for Harvey. And I say to Ted, I was like, what would make a great movie is doing American Splendor. He's like, I know. I've thought about that or whatever. But, I was like, I can give you access to this guy and have a conversation. He's like, are you kidding me? I was like, no, I can make the phone call happen. And that's basically where it started. It was like me kind of dusting off an old script that was abandoned, thinking about, wait a second, I'm working for a filmmaker right now who does independent films. He works with Ang Lee. He's worked with Hal Hartley, I believe. In fact, I think he started his career with Alex Cox on Repo Man or something.
Oh, wow.
So the guy, Ted Hope, loves the alternative and the independent. And so it was just a match made in heaven, I thought. And that's what happened. It became a year and a half later, became this Sundance Award-winning film. But the true treasure, the magic, the magicians are the filmmakers.
Yeah, they really are.
The directors somehow were able to consume all of this, comic book history, and take this guy and his wife and their story and turn it into like this. Well, as Josh always points out, a romantic comedy, which is how it was sold, even though it's a very bizarre romantic comedy, Yeah,
absolutely, man. No, then again, it's and for film school buffs like very Minnie and Moskowitz in terms of just these very ordinary people fighting each other, and Harvey overcoming, real life, and I mean that's the underlying point of American Splendor, and of course the movie as well, but also breaking that fourth wall was really inventive and makes the film stand, I think will stand the test of time and just be one of those great, unique movies.
It could have failed miserably, and it was a brilliant, it was a coup. It somehow they made it work, and it feels jarring at first. It's bizarre, and it becomes this meta thing that really serves the thesis of the movie. As I think Josh and I are about 4 episodes away from finishing the production on the podcast, and we're about to come to probably the most important scene in the movie. Do you agree, Josh?
Yeah, the Harvey Pekar name story scene. Yeah, that's an all-time favorite of mine.
Which it's been building up to the movie. You don't even know it's coming when it happens, And the movie tends to throw curveballs like that, from the way Harvey and Joyce, their first date turns into a marriage. You can't believe it, but they do such a great job, crafting it and performing it that it sells. It actually works. You believe it,
Yep.
And all the little opportunities that occurred because of the other message of the movie, which is, show up to your own party, put yourself out there. If you want to, craft and show and tell stories, go for it. Don't let anybody stop you. Yep. Don't wait to be sanctioned. I guess in a way that was an early message, just from the comics alone before the movie ever came out.
Sure.
I believe to Josh and me and a lot of creators like us, this guy just did it. He didn't wait for permission. No apologies.
So now you're talking about Harvey himself now.
Harvey himself, and the fact that he produced this comic series, on his own dime with his own time,
Without there being a proven forerunner that was people want to buy black and white autobiographical stories about a poor schlub in Cleveland, who's big market for that.
Well, but you're right. It's and this is what fascinates me about the underground comic scene. And finally got to talk to Dennis Kitchen at the end of last year for the first time. And, it's its own little world that sits alongside the Marvel and DC world and everything. And occasionally, you'll get people like, well, first of all, Josh, I wanted to get back because, you did a great project with Brooke Gladstone of NPR's On the Media, and I, being a broadcaster, I am fascinated by that show, and I listen constantly. And I remember when your graphic novel came out, and there was a different kind of real story, and it was an attempt to kind of, because there's all this kind of suspicion and anger towards the news media. I think this graphic novel that you and Brooke did obviously was. You explain it better than I'm trying to, so go ahead.
Sure, yeah. So it's called The Influencing Machine, and the thesis of it is that it's a given that everybody thinks that the media is out to brainwash you and to twist facts. We just all accept that. And the reason that we all accept that is because we've broken the world down into, there's your media, which you listen to and trust, and is always objective and always
fair
on the right side of things. And exactly. And then there's the other media, which is what the other people listen to. And that media is lying to them and twisting and deceiving and distorting the truth. So Brooks' thesis was that, the media is really just a mirror of society. And if society is fractured and lacking in trust and, on multiple levels, then the media reflects that.
Sure.
And so she, in what we do in the book, in comic book form, is sort of, she traces, this idea of manipulative media in sort of a larger sense, like media being television, radio, the internet, books, scrolls. She keeps going farther and farther back, and sort of goes back to, where did even the concept of journalism emerge from, and she goes all the way back to ancient Guatemala and Rome, and sort of builds it back up to show us how did we get to where we are now. And the cool thing about it, of course, is that it's all told in comic book form. And I was lucky enough to be asked to illustrate it. And it's actually a kind of funny story because I was just finishing AD. I was literally, because the book version of AD is an expanded version of what's on the Smith website. Yep. And so I spent maybe, 4, 5, 6 months working on that expanded version and doing all the production and working with Pantheon. And really, making the book into what it ended up being. And right when I was finishing that up, I got a phone call out of the blue. I picked up the phone, and on the other end of the line was this voice that I recognized because, like you, I'm an avid fan of On the Media. And I was like, wait a second, I've heard this voice before. And it was Brooke Gladstone, this voice that I'd heard every week on her show. And she was asking me if, she says, I'm thinking of doing this comic book, and I was giving your name as a potential illustrator for it.
Wow.
Would you be interested? And so we ended up meeting, a couple times, talking about what she had in mind and coming up with this avatar of her that is the sort of guide for the reader throughout the whole book. And, understanding comics was a big guide for us, or an inspiration for us.
Scott McCloud stuff, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And sort of took it from there. And so I went straight on from finishing AD to then working for 2 years straight on The Influencing Machine. So that was that was about a 6-year intense period of being chained to my drawing table.
Jeez.
But 2 pretty good projects came out of it
I would say
have
so.
Definitely had long lives, for sure.
I was going to ask, I would imagine that it still resonates now, in The Influence Machine.
Yeah, both of them. AD has become a common read at a lot of colleges, so I've been fortunate enough to get to travel around and speak at different colleges that have used it as a book that the whole incoming freshman class reads and discusses. And then The Influencing Machine has had a similar journey. And at first, Brooke was the one who was going around talking about the book, but in recent years, I've had the opportunity to go and talk about it as well. So, and we've done some joint, appearances as well. So it's pretty cool, sort of where these things can take you.
Yeah, and I think it opens your work to a different audience, and I think that's fantastic. And much like Dino, when you did the Cuba testimonial book.
Oh,
yeah,
right. I say it again?
Cuba, My Revolution.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. With Inverno Lopez.
Yes.
And Jose Villarrubia and Patrick Rousseau did the lettering. And Jose actually won his first comic book industry award for coloring Cuba, My Revolution.
Wow, that's great. Yeah.
And he's such a sweetheart. But yeah, I was able to. It's funny, as much as I was trying to escape memoir, I kept getting drawn back into it. In fact, I think Harvey Pekar's The Quitter is the book that kind of put me on the map, to be honest. Even though I have been nominated for, I don't know if they have this award anymore in the Eisners, but it's something about recognizing new talent or something like that.
Oh, was it the Russ Manning or?
No, not that, but just check out the new kids on the block.
Sure.
Even though by the time you get recognized, you're probably the old kid on the block anyway. But I'd been nominated for Opposable Thumbs, which was my collection of autobiocomics.
Sure.
Kind of when Josh was doing a collection of his travel stories, I came out with that, I think in 2001. But anyway, so I did The Quitter with Harvey Pekar. Then I got to do The Alcoholic with Jonathan Ames and Lee Lowridge. And I think Patrick Rousseau lettered all 3 of the Vertigo graphic novels. Okay. And then Cuba, My Revolution. But I was always desperate to draw the Fantastic Four or the Thing or something,
Oh, yeah.
Superheroes having sex in outer space. I don't care what it is. And now that's what I'm doing. Now I'm finally.
With Red Hook. Yes.
Now, even though I'm doing it now, it feels like, the Archie kind of PG version of, the kind of stuff I want to do. Because I kind of have this, I don't know, this prude art style. I feel, it's funny because I was talking to a friend about YA comics.
Mm-hmm.
So, George O'Connor is one of my studio mates, and he does the Olympian series, and it's very successful. And I kept looking at my art recently, and I was like, I inherently have a YA style, young adult.
See that. Sure, sure.
And it's because I'm inspired by the likes of, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, C.C. Beck, Will Eisner. But I would hazard that today's standards, those are YA styles. Like that first decade of Marvel, you could easily be YA books today.
Yes, definitely.
And so, yeah, even though I know we've had other previous interviews where I guess I've talked about the current style of modern superhero comics is just too ornate, too much detail. It's like blockbuster art, like trying to compete with the movies in some way, or at least complement the movie styles. And that's not my skill set or interest level, to be honest,
Well, remind people of your Yancey Street.
Oh, right. So I did, I've drawn for Marvel and DC. I've had the opportunities, and I did a 4-issue miniseries called Night Falls on Yancey Street, starring The Thing, and it was kind of like a pop noir comic that Evan Dorkin wrote. That was a lot of fun, but even that experience was kind of difficult because, I can tell the difference between what I'm providing art-wise versus what Marvel's publishing, and I was definitely an outlier. I mean, I was more in the camp, I hope, of like, Mike Allred and Darwin Cook.
I hear you, man. I do think, especially in Marvel, I don't mean to cut you off because I know what you're saying about superhero books being too ornate and everything, but I do think, and actually, I don't know now that CB is in charge, but it felt to me like when Axel was running things, guys like Tradmore and like
Paul Pope,
atypical artists were getting their shots at doing mainstream Marvel books, and that was really exciting. Or even, I will say at DC, Young Animal, when you had guys like Oming doing the Cape Carson book,
right.
And I mean, that's a non-traditional kind of,
Absolutely, and I'm glad for that. And I remember when Axel was the editor-in-chief, and he did take more of those risks, which are less. I mean, look what happened in the last month. DC Comics 86's Vertigo, and now Mad Magazine.
I wanted to talk to you guys about both of those things. Go on.
What's next? Batman?
No, I don't think. Yeah, of course not. No, of course not.
Of course not.
But that
no. What's next is that they're focusing, I believe, on their Trinity characters,
Absolutely.
Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, and that's where they've seen the most success.
That's where the money is.
It's a shame, but that's where the money is. So, as a business decision, I get it. It's just sad.
Well, yeah, because creatively, that's where you got to make room for the weird ideas. And I mean, and again, as a Vertigo veteran, I wanted to hear, and Josh, I want your opinion as well. It just it seemed to me that it's like, God, this is where the Invisibles and Neil Gaiman stuff, and of course Grant and all these. I mean, I'm thinking of writers, but the artists as well. I mean, this is where the real experimental shit was happening.
And they just announced Neil Gaiman's Sandman as a TV show.
Right, exactly.
So a lot of, Karen Berger was way ahead of her time.
100%, man. And even another Vertigo thing that actually was a comic only a couple of years ago is going to be a movie in August. The Kitchen, which is all about 1970s mob wives. All the husbands are in jail, and the wives are like, and the mob is ignoring the wives and not, barely giving them money to survive. And they're like, all right, we're going to take the business in our own hands. And it's like, that's a brilliant idea. And it's going to be Tiffany Haddish and what's
great.
her Megan? Mike.
Mullany?
Yeah, not Megan Mullany. Mike and Molly.
Oh, okay. I know who you're
talking. McCarthy. Megan McCarthy, right? I think that's her name.
Oh.
Melissa
McCarthy. Excuse me. Thank you.
Melissa
guys.
McCarthy.
Yes.
Sorry.
No. Hey, it's not my name. Shame on me. Sorry, Melissa. Apologies. The trailer looks amazing, and it was Ming Doyle was the artist, Ali Masters was the writer, and it was this great Vertigo crime comic that flew under the radar. And I personally think, and I want your guys' opinions, just like Mad Magazine, they just weren't really promoting this stuff, especially Mad. Oh, God, it would get me so angry, and I just talked about this on my last episode that I recorded. You go to San Diego Comic-Con, and there's this great Mad mural in the DC booth area, and it looks like, oh, yeah, there they go. They're right there and everything, right alongside the Justice League and everything else. But the reality is, last year, Mad was publishing a Riverdale parody. And they even said it was Starchy rebooted. And, Starchy, for listeners, that was the classic Kurtzman parody, or Kurtzman or Elder parody, or maybe both of them, of Archie Andrews. And now Mad was going to take a stab at Riverdale, the soap opera. And it's like, that's fucking brilliant. They should be promoting this. And they didn't. Yeah. And this was from last year. And it was in doing prep for this conversation I had yesterday. And I'm like, how come I didn't know about this? This would absolutely have been something I would have promoted on Word Balloon.
And it's something that it was like probably one of my first comics, to be honest, as a kid.
Sure.
Was Mad Magazine, like I may not have understood half of the humor at the time.
Exactly.
But
go on.
It was an all ages comic. Kids could get something out of it. Adults could get something out of it. It was parodying, pop culture, movies, literature, and then also all that stuff. And then the Mad Fold-In, Al Jaffe.
Yep.
I mean, and then recently in the new iteration, when they started over the number one, I think it was Bill Morrison, who had worked on The Simpsons, took over as editor-in-chief. And then, they hired my buddy Bob Fingerman and, and a bunch of other folks, the newbies to kind of take over. And I don't know what happened. And again, at the same time, we're talking about internet and web and everything. Like, where are the newsstands? Where do you find a Mad Magazine besides a comic book shop? Are they at the 7-Elevens? I don't have a 7-Eleven because I live in New York City.
I challenge you to find them at the comic book stores, frankly. And I'm saying this living in Chicago. I don't think every comic book store in Chicago carried Mad as far as magazine form, because I was getting a lot of snide responses when I was griping about it over the weekend. Well, when's the last time you bought one? Or do you subscribe? Like, no, I don't subscribe, but when it was something interesting on the cover, I bought it. And I can't tell you the last time I saw it. And also, they slowly started pulling it back. It's been dying a death by 1,000 cuts for frankly, several years. And I talked to Bill, because Bill had just done his Yellow Submarine graphic novel. And I said, hey, man, I really want to talk to you about Mad. And he said, yeah. He goes, let's wait a couple months and we'll talk about Mad. And then literally he was announcing that he barely got an issue or two out before he quit. And I have a feeling that the writing was on the wall. And he's like, they're not giving me the budget. They're not, whatever. I'm assuming that. This is all my assumption. Right. But, it was surprising because I know he was jazzed about getting the job. And I know he was, God, what he did for Bongo and all the Simpsons comics and stuff. What do you think, Josh? Right. What do you like, Mad? And
well, wait.
Go ahead.
Should we explain?
Sure.
Should we explain what Mad Magazine is to Josh?
Yeah, Dean, go ahead.
We'll use flashcards, Josh. Don't worry, it'll be really easy. You'll get it in 2 seconds. Don't worry about it.
Don't do that to me.
I agree with you guys 1,000% about Mad. Like as what it represented and what it was for our childhoods and for our parents' childhoods, probably even more than us. It was so formative for so many generations of wise asses.
Yes.
But I think it was a victim of its own success. And maybe I'm just parroting what people have already been saying, but it just seemed like it wasn't relevant anymore because it had been surpassed by its imitators in a sense. And those,
yes, I understand.
Yeah, exactly. And The Simpsons. I mean, like what Mad started, this kind of ironic, very suspicious take on popular culture, became popular culture in the 1990s. And at that point, when it's available everywhere you look, a black and white magazine just doesn't have the cultural strength that it used to. So I mourn its passing, but I also kind of accept that at a certain point, some things have to end, That's just the way I look at it. Like, it's better than it just struggling along and being like a shell of what it used to be. If it doesn't have the impact anymore and it's not like forming new generations of wiseacres and cultural side-eyers, then maybe it doesn't need to be here anymore. R.I.P.
The other part of the of what they've announced, I believe, is that they're going to be stopping creating new material and just keep publishing it, but with reprints. Yep. So it is going to stick around. And I figure, well, why publish a magazine? Just publish book collections then,
Well, maybe that is the real. Well, it's funny because again, in the conversation yesterday, it almost sounds like they're doing that likely to fulfill magazine subscriptions that are already in place. So rather than refund people, okay, we're giving you the magazine as long as you're current year subscription goes on. I mean, that's just a guess. And also, we'll see after 2 issues. Well, they said there's new content for the next 2 issues, and then they're going to all reprints after that. But I guess we'll see. And I agree with you. You know, the survival of a black and white magazine is one thing, but then I point to Cracked, that whoever bought the assets of Cracked has reinvented Cracked, and it has a digital presence, and I think is a funny website. And I do think that, and again, they've taken the Mad brand. Hell, that Fox show ran for 14 years, the sketch show that was on opposite Saturday Night Live, and even the Cartoon Network one of recent years was a pretty funny show, 15-minute show, and it was for a YA audience, but it had that same flavor of mad humor, and I was pretty impressed with that. So yeah, I think it should try to change with, and maybe they were trying to change with the times. I mean, like I said, I've been reading a couple of these last issues to kind of, see what was going on. And, I don't know. The zip wasn't there. And like you said, it was an all-ages book. I mean, that's the thing. It was great for 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds to kind of start getting a satirical comedy bent. Right. But it also got, and like you said, Josh, in its strength in the 50s, it was the Daily Show of its day. I mean, it really was right there with, and in fact was along in the list of what they called sick humor in the 50s, Mort Saul and Lenny Bruce, and it wasn't, and some of it was gross out humor, but also it was hitting taboo subjects. I mean, that's what made it sick. It was like, oh, you can't go there, and these guys did.
It's funny you say the Daily Show of its time. I know one of the co-creators of the Daily Show, Liz Winstead. Okay. It just occurs to me that why didn't they just hire her to write some material? I know they had hired some comedy writers for the new iteration, and full disclosure, I actually did subscribe to it because I wanted to make sure that I got it because I wasn't sure my comic shop got it, and I wanted to see what Bob Fingerman and some of my friends were doing. So I do get this, and it's fun getting a comic book in the mail. I've never done that before, and it's weird, like it gets delivered to your home, and it's got this extra piece of paper wrapped around it, and if it rained, that means it got all wet, and I still get pissed off at that. I mean,
did they send it to you in a plain brown wrapper?
No, not that kind of magazine, Josh.
See, I really don't know what it is.
I really don't. So Mad Magazine is a humor publication.
I'm not comprehending any of the words that you're. Right. Yeah, sorry.
So much, man. Okay, you guys are killing me.
But I do think it's interesting what Josh said also as well is that its imitators surpassed kind of what they were doing, and now again it's competing with all the media that's online. I mean, listen, can Mad? I didn't want to go there, but I was going to say, can Mad even compete with half the tweets people are following these days? I don't even know.
Well, but that's the thing. I kind of felt like today's political environment would be easy grist for Mad, and again, I think they did. They obviously were. They were making fun of the Trump administration. Of course, they were. In fact,
every cover, other cover had because I've been getting them. I suspect it's interesting.
I suspect that, frankly, especially with AT&T buying Time Warner, that I think being in the satire business is I'm sure budgetary choices were definitely part of it as well. But I almost wonder if there was any sort of like, oh, do we want to publish, something that is willing to
be that satirical? John, a friend of mine has a real strong point of view about the AT&T buying DC, which is that they are ultimately going to probably stop print publishing.
Could be
because AT&T doesn't see how print publishing makes any money.
Right.
So everything's going to probably transition to digital. DC will probably eventually transition to digital. I mean, another publisher, Marvel, isn't IDW right now publishing Marvel comics, original Marvel comics?
Marvel Kids comics, yes, they are.
That's right. So they're not even handling that aspect of the publishing realm,
Oh, yeah. Marty Pascal was saying that even a couple of years ago that he expected the IPs to be that they would cease publishing and they would license them out to other publishers. And so that
it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening. Yeah.
Could be. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
No, and I do think you're right. I do think the next couple of years will kind of tell the tale of where comics go as far as the big two.
Yep. And,
Well, that's
with that in mind,
go on.
well, I mean, but with that in mind, it means that you can get depressed, but what are you going to do about it?
Right.
You're going to sit here and cry or wait for an answer? No, you have to develop and spark your own answers. When I wasn't getting hired by Marvel and DC at a certain age, I created Activate, which was a webcomics collective. Then Trip City, and again, being inspired by people like Harvey Pekar's self-publishing American Splendor. So I feel like part of the next step, everyone talks Kickstarter, but I do think Patreon is something that is interesting to look at. Some people are doing pretty well with Patreon. I don't know if they're paying their rent with it, but, and so I'm thinking about sparking a Patreon myself, because now that I've tasted full autonomy, I don't know if I can go back, John.
I get it. Believe me, I get it. I understand. I have a very simple radio job when it comes to broadcasting. I'm not a host. I'm just literally reporting traffic. And that's fine, because even in the confines of that, sometimes I'll make a wisecrack and they're like, keep it to the traffic. And it's like, okay, fine, I get it. Wow. And again, I get to cut loose on Word Balloon. And Word Balloon is the like I said, it's the talk show I've always wanted. And then that's why. And yeah, I don't have to answer to anybody. So no, I get it. And also, again, we mentioned it before, the rise of image, but also I just think both online and published creator comics and stuff. I think, I think it's a great time. I really do think the last 20 years has been an upswing in terms of people being able to make their stuff and get it out there. And yeah, you're right. It's competition and it's fierce, but again, I do think quality stuff finds its audience.
And being unique. I
yes.
mean, I don't mean be different to be different, because we are different.
Sure.
So just, be okay with that and be different. And then eventually, and then show up. Don't be shy to tell people about your stuff. See if you can make a dent, and see what happens.
Yeah.
I get it. We have to pay rent. We need, and I'm about a month and a half away from not having any new work, and that's the life of the freelance.
I'm with you, man.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
Josh knows, I know. So you're always developing new ideas, keeping your ear to the ground, finger on the pulse, see what's happening. I mean, we're three middle-aged white guys complaining right now,
No, we're figuring it out, man. It's like,
but we're figuring it out.
Yeah, and honestly, it's like we're telling it like it is. It's like, hey, this isn't the world that our parents grew up in terms of you could have one job and you don't worry that gold watch is going to be there and everything else, and it's just like, yeah, I don't know.
I asked my mother about this when I was younger, and I declared, like, at age 12, I was like, I want to be a comic book artist. And she had no worries about that, not because she knew comics, but she was deputy director of the New York State Council of the Arts, so she understood about funding and the trials and tribulations of what it was like to be an artist in New York City. But she wasn't worried for me, because back then you could be an artist in New York City.
Right.
You may not have a yacht and you may not get a country house, but you could probably get by if you were good enough and committed enough to, scratch by. Yeah. Maybe you have a roommate and you eat, cheap food or whatever. And nowadays you need 3 jobs and 6 roommates in order to scratch by.
Yeah. No, I know, man.
So,
I know.
And she can't believe what happened. She doesn't understand it.
No, I hear you. No, none of us do. And really, I mean, that's and again, there's a generation of kids that are coming out of college and they're facing the same problems that we are.
Yeah, I can't imagine the anxiety of all that. So yeah.
All right, so there we go. On a scary end note, that's good. No, what else is
that's terrifying?
Well, I'm glad. Honestly,
everybody just stop. Everybody stop what they're doing.
Slide out.
That's right.
Get into a corner and start quivering. It's all right. Well, all right. So beyond the podcast, what else is going? Josh, what else is going on right now? What do you got coming up?
Well, I'm actually doing a lot of teaching nowadays.
Terrific.
So I teach at SVA, the School of Visual Arts here in New York City. I'm on faculty there, and I teach a course with Nick Bertozzi, another one of these indie cartoonists.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I also teach a summer course at Michigan State through the journalism department on nonfiction comics. And I also teach at a master's program with a low residency master's program called Solstice out of their English department. So I find it very funny to think that comics now are not only being taught, which was inconceivable to me, because Dean and I went to an art high school. We went to music and art high school, now known as LaGuardia High School, the Fame School, and they would not have taught us comics if you'd had a gun to their head. Like, they did not think of comics as a legitimate art form. It was below commercial art even. It was this bastard child of something that you weren't supposed to be caught thinking about. Sure. So I find it so ironic now that here I am. I don't even have a degree in comics. I certainly don't have a master's, but I'm teaching comics out of a journalism program, out of a cartooning program, and out of a creative writing program. So I kind of just thank my lucky stars every day. But I have, besides the podcast, which is taking up a lot of our time because as Dean was mentioning, we're trying to bank a bunch of episodes so that we can have them all nicely edited and perfectly formed and shaped when we release them every week. I am developing a new project that's going to be partly memoir and partly reportage, and it has to do with this epidemic of school shootings that our country is suffering through. So let's leave it at there for now, because it's still very much like in the getting a proposal ready for my agent stage. But I'm hoping to spend the next couple years crafting that and putting that out there and hoping to start a conversation.
That's great, man. Very, very cool. And Dean, like you said, you're wrapping up season 3 of Red Hook, and did you say Volume 2 is coming out from Image later this fall?
Yeah, Volume 2, War Cry, is supposed to come out in October from Image. I'm wrapping up season 3 of Starcross. My production on it, but it's I think chapter 16 is coming out this Wednesday out of 26. But it's funny, I was just thinking about what Josh was saying about how there's more schools teaching comics. Yeah. But I feel like if I was teaching comics in my senior year or however long the course ran, I would, at the end of the course, I would teach them how to be an electrician so they could get a job.
I'm with you, man. No, I understand. Yeah.
Teach them a marketable skill.
Absolutely.
Something marketable, something that, I don't know, how to cook or, whatever. Because that's what happens in a lot of these art schools is like you get this degree and then what happens?
Right.
And that's the difficult transition, into turning that into monetizing the thing you learned and the skills that you've acquired and the passion you have for these things. And it's funny, sometimes I'll meet young, budding artists, and the first question they always ask isn't how do you do what you do? It's, are you making money at this? How do you make money at this? And I get it, but that was not my first question. I just wanted to draw Fantastic Four. And I did. Actually. I did draw Canon Fantastic. Anyway, so I don't know. I mean, so with that, after I wrap up Starcross, I'm going to be going to Yaddo, the Artist Writers Retreat in Saratoga.
Oh, that's great.
Springs.
I know you've done it before. Absolutely, man. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun and a special place. And I hope to finish writing a novel I started years ago. And that would be a nice space to do that in, plus also develop other ideas. And I guess the only other thing that's coming up, really, is I've also been writing a new play.
Hey, great.
Which has been fun. Thank you. And I collaborated with writer Dave Kelly. He's the co-creator of a comic called Tales of the Night Watchman, which is published by So What Press. And it's a local, comic book series that just got picked up, even though it's So What Press publishes it. They're going to be distributed by It's Alive. And we decided to do a crossover between Tales of the Night Watchman and The Red Hook. And I co-plotted this story with Dave Kelly, co-wrote it, and it's called The Untold Legend of Luna, and it's drawn by Tales of the Night Watchman artist Brett Hobson, or he's one of the artists, and he's drawing it right now, and I think that'll be coming out in December. So it'll actually be another comic book out there with the Red Hook in it.
That's fantastic.
So,
am I right, Night Watchman? Sweet. Wasn't that like kind of a Batman inspired idea, or no? Is that a different Night Watchman?
Well, I don't know. It sounds like a familiar character. He has a scepter with magical powers.
Yeah, I'm looking now. I'm looking at a cover now. Okay.
So you are aware. I mean, I think there are like 8 issues out there. He's been doing this for a few years with Laura Antel and other artists and writers. And it's just when I approached Dave and I kind of had this idea, I was like, listen, who are the local Brooklyn artists, the local, Brooklyn publishers with local Brooklyn characters? And that was one of them. I know that Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor have one, I think, with Frank Thierry, called Captain Brooklyn. Yep. Riley Brown co-created a series called, I think, Power Play.
Yes, that's right.
With some characters. Yes. And so, I like that there's this local stuff. I'm sure Chicago has a hero somewhere, lurking around. And I don't know. It kind of pulls up the heartstrings.
Michael what?
Michael Jordan? Michael Jordan? He is a superhero. That's a real life.
You're right
superhero.
about that. You're right about that.
That's no joke.
Jeez.
But yeah, so that's what's coming out next. Plus, when you have ideas, like just this morning, it took me 2 hours. I was about to leave my house, and I had an idea, and 2 hours later went, and I jotted down.
Oh, that's good, man. That's good. You leaned into the impulse. That's good. That's good. That means the creative juices are flowing, and you're firing. See, you're not wasting your middle age. Don't worry about it, man. There's no crisis there.
God, I hope not.
No, man. Honestly, I'll end on this way, and I want to know what you guys think. When I hit 50, it was like, all right, what haven't I done yet, and what do I still want to do? And truly, that's where my focus has been the last 4 years. And I can honestly say that I've had enough successes, or at least good attempts, that I'm not dissatisfied. I'm like, okay, God forbid if lightning struck tomorrow and they're burying me, I can honestly say that I got to do a lot of fun things on my terms. I consider this podcast like a musician that plays clubs, and it's like I have regular gigs. I'm not selling out stadiums. But I do have a nice following that shows up when I come to play, and that's cool, and that's great, and that's very satisfying, and especially as, like I said, the broadcast world collapses around me. So, what do you guys think?
Appreciate working from it. No, I think it's great. I think the one thing I've learned, and I guess we'll end with Josh, but the one thing I've learned is that I am a workaholic. Working is not hard for me to do, and of course, my work in general these days is doing something I love. Sure. But what I need to do more is to recreate, hang out with my girlfriend, hang out with my friends, go outside, get out of the chair. Yep. That's what I did, because someone just had a heart attack last week, some young cartoonist, from just sitting too much, and it's a wake up call. And I don't want to have that kind of wake up call. Even though I ride my bike every day to and from the studio, that's not enough. I got to get out more. So that's my next mission.
Yeah, that's something that Dean and I talk a lot about. Is it's sort of how we're balancing the fact that we're getting to do what we love, but we also have this. I don't know if it's the American Protestant work ethic idea that you just have to be productive constantly. I think that's something, Dean, I know you and I used to talk about that when we were teenagers. It's like, you got to be productive, you got to be making stuff, and that onus sort of can get in the way of being just a human being sometimes, and remembering to get outside and spend time with your family and your loved ones, and finding the balance between all that. And then of course the freelance life is like, you never turn down a potential job, so that also obviously affects how much free time you have, because you never know, you might have too much free time in a month, so you better make hay while the sun shines.
Understood. Well, guys, honestly, a pleasure, and good stuff. I expected no less, and I really good luck with Scene by Scene, and as you continue to explore the world of American Splendor, but also the world that informed the film as well. And I think your dynamic comes through as far as this conversation we've all had, and yeah, man. Hey, seriously, good luck with all the comic projects and stuff. That's great stuff, and please, you're both welcome back as always to talk more.
Thanks
you, John.
so much, John. Thank you.
Great conversation as always.
Yeah, and actually, John, before we sign off, you mentioned, you don't have to leave this in, but you mentioned that you're a traffic reporter.
Yes.
And one of the things that really told me that I was in a new place was when I moved to Chicago, because I was listening to the traffic reports on the radio. And whenever they would mention sort of slowdowns after an accident, and the people that were causing traffic delays because they were watching the accident. What do you guys call that out there in Chicago?
A gaper's delay.
Yes, gapers.
Yes. Slack-jawing yokels. What do you? I'm sure assholes, but what else do you call them?
Those are rubberneckers.
Oh, okay.
Here on the East Coast. So I was, used to hearing a traffic report where they talk about rubberneckers, but gapers was a whole new thing for
I know.
me.
I kind of want them to do comics of slack-jawed, people with their mouths open, like a Mo Howard kind of shock and awe kind of look on their face and stuff. There you go, Josh Neufeld, Dean Haspiel. Check out Scene by Scene. You can find it wherever you find podcasts, and I'm telling you, it's very entertaining and reminds us how great of a movie American Splendor was. But their conversations are fantastic, and I think you'll enjoy hearing them, especially if you enjoyed this last conversation that we just had. And look forward to their new projects coming up very soon. Thanks again for listening to Word Balloon. It was all brought to you by Aftershock Comics. Tremendous books, great genre-breaking books that deserve your attention. I am very excited about some of the new upcoming titles. Can't wait to pour through Joe Pruitt's horror anthology Shock. Looking forward to talking to Joe in the weeks ahead. Also, Cullen Bunn's Knights Temporal to put alongside his other books like The Brothers Dracul and Dark Ark. Also, Tim Seeley's Dark Red is fantastic. Chris Sabella's Trustfall. Donny Cates's Baby Teeth. Marguerite Bennett's Animosity. Garth Ennis's A Walk Through Hell. But also upcoming Matthew Klickstein's You Are Obsolete. In the weeks ahead, we'll be talking to more Aftershock creators about their books. But don't wait. Go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Thanks again for listening. More great Word Balloon coming this month. Man, I have got some cool surprises to give to you in the days ahead. I know next week is going to be San Diego Comic-Con. I won't be there. I will be at Terrificon the following month, though, in August, just a month away. Can't wait to be there. We're going to have some more guests that are going to be at Terrificon. One Terrificon guest is Cully Hamner, and he's our sister podcast today that I'm putting out. So if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you check out the conversation with Cully, also released today. And man, some very exciting surprises. Old friends coming back, new people for the first time, and I can't believe some of the names I've been able to attract. So be looking out in the next couple days for some more great Word Balloon conversations for July and beyond. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2019.